Hello, everybody. We have a very special show today. This is a brand new sort of podcast series that I'm going to be hosting. Well, yeah, I'm sort of the host, but my co-host is Father Panayiotis Papageorgiou, and yeah, introduce yourself, Papa.
Yeah, hi Strati, hi everybody. Thank you, Strati, for creating this opportunity, and we will get the chance to talk about a lot of things. So go ahead and start with what your idea is, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I also just wanted to say that this was something that we have been thinking about for a long time, and I think it's a format people will like because they'll get to hear your thoughts, they'll get to pick, we sort of will pick your brain, as we say, and it'll be more, what's the word? We can flesh things out rather than a bite-sized video of just a burst of information. It's more, this is a discussion, this is a conversation. This episode, the first one of this podcast that I haven't decided on a name yet, is going to be on the Pseudo-Morphosis of Orthodoxy. Can you explain to us what that is?
Oh, that's a term that we used in the 20th century about what happened in the 18th and 19th centuries to the Orthodox Church as it was coming out of, especially the Greek Orthodox Church, as it was coming out of the 400 years under the Turks, but also the other churches like the Russians, who were influenced a lot by the West. And what the pseudomorphosis was is that a lot of the new theologians and priests and people who were studying Orthodox theology were going to Europe, to both Protestant as well as Roman Catholic universities, especially Germany, but also in Rome. And they were returning back to the Orthodox lands with many times basically collections of theological topics that were reflected on, and they collected these ideas from the Roman Catholics or the Protestants or both of them. And many times they were influenced by, because they didn't know themselves the patristic era, and they had not studied in depth the fathers of the early church, they would produce and introduce into the modern era theological concepts and theological ideas that were basically not orthodox and not according to the patristic theology, which the Orthodox Church always had. The other side was the influence on art and architecture, especially art. I think we see both in Russia as well as in Greece in the 19th century the influence of the West, Renaissance, and we have these very realistic pictures being developed. And one of the classic icons that I refer to when I think of this pseudomorphosis of iconography is the picture of the Father as an old man with a son on his lap, and the Holy Spirit depicted as a dove right in between them. That is really, I would say, a heretical picture. It's pretty much Arian, according to what Arius taught. And if this picture was produced in the 4th century, they would kick you out of the church, because that was basically what Arius was saying, that the son is younger than the father, and there was a time that he was created. Therefore, he's not equal to the father.
Yeah.
And of course, the depiction of the father as a man, as an old man, is really totally unacceptable, because we have never seen the Father. So you remove from the Trinity the mystery of the Trinity and the mystery of the unity when you depict the Trinity as three incarnate beings, the Spirit incarnate into a dove, the Father as an old man, and the Son as a young man. So this was part of that pseudomorphosis. and a lot of other things also with regard
Well,
to.
let me just touch on the art for a second before we move on from it. The art is, you know, is what we see in the Renaissance sort of you know, tradition, which is a break with tradition, essentially. Renaissance. It's where the art, it's more about the artist's ability, and it's more about his skill and his I don't know, his ability to draw realism, and much more involved than what I just said, much more to it. But depicting the Father is something that you're right. In the early church, they would have never have allowed. And in the early church, they in fact would ban certain images, like the lamb. They would ban certain images, and they were very strict.
Yeah.
Very strict. This liberalism, which is what the Renaissance period is, the liberalism of artistic expression in the ecclesial sphere. And I don't think people appreciate that today.
Yeah.
I don't think people appreciate what an icon is.
Yeah, I think that people love the realistic. It's a natural tendency. They love the beautiful lines and faces and things like that. And when they see a harsher Byzantine style image of a saint or Christ, people are turned off because they're so used to seeing the beautiful colors and the faces that look so realistic. And so I think all of that influenced the art in the 19th century, and both in Russia as well as in Greece. Russia, I think, went a little further in that. Greece recovered a little sooner, but Russia is also recovering today, and I think that it's a great, wonderful thing to see that they're going back to their traditional icons that they used to have, and they're creating amazing.
Oh, they have entire workshops where they train. I don't know, hundreds a year. You know, I don't know how many.
Yeah,
but they're churning people out.
Yeah, they're going back, and so also in Greece. In Greece, we had Kondoglu, who did a lot of good work in restoring the older traditions of iconography. And after Kondoglu, there are others who followed. Today, again, we see a tendency of going to the artist's own expression, and everybody wants to do their own thing and be unique. And we stretch the figures and we stretch faces and we do all kinds of things. And that is not really expressing the spiritual aspect that the original iconography was intended to do, but it's more giving the style of the artist more emphasis and prominence, rather than removing the artist and allowing the icon to be inspiring only in a spiritual way. So that's it's a human tendency, and we need to be careful with it.
But it's incredibly humanistic, if you may. It's a humanism, isn't it? But let's not go there. Let's focus more now on the theology of the 19th century, and discuss how that's still affecting us, and how it affected even in your life with your own with your mother, you know, and that sort of let's talk about that.
Well, growing up, of course, in Cyprus, we were influenced by the Zoe movement and the Sodir movement. Those were two movements strongly influenced by Roman Catholicism and Protestantism at the same time. Very interestingly, the influence of Roman Catholicism was that this group were like the orders of the Roman Catholic nuns and monks. Well, orders they call them. They don't even call them nuns and monks. But people dedicated themselves to a life of celibacy, and they were members of this organization, starting with Zoe, and then Zoe split into two groups in the 50s and became Sodir. The second group became Sodir, and these groups were basically bringing in emphasis that was influenced by the Roman Catholics and also by the Protestants. They were anti-monastic in so many different ways. Sometimes, not all of them, but I think the spirit was anti-monastic. The monasticism is the spirit of orthodoxy, but they claim that they could be the way they lived and the way they thought. They were an exo-ecclesiastical group, groups, both of them, in the end. Exo-ecclesiastical means that they were not under the authority of the church. They acted on their own and lived on their own. But eventually, I think they put themselves, once they were ordained, those who were ordained, they would put themselves under the church. But they also did some good. The Zoe movement, which influenced my mother, for example, and to a certain extent my father, they had a good influence. They emphasized the study of the Bible. They created Bible study groups for both men and women, and they emphasized the study of the Bible. But the spirit, the understanding behind all of that remained kind of a Protestant approach.
Yeah.
So that really affected the Church of Greece a lot and the Church of Cyprus during the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Yeah.
And in the 70s, when monasticism began to come alive again, the late 70s and early 80s, they kind of took a second seed to monasticism again that was flourishing. So
where are they now?
they're not so important. I don't know that they have many members as they used to. They're not as important as they used to. But that group also provided for the church educated theologians. Archbishop Demetrios was a member of the Zoe movement, and he's a biblical scholar. So, brilliant man, and he dedicated his life. The Archbishop of Albania is also, Anastasios is also a product of the Zoe movement, and he's an exceptional person in the history of the church and the life of the church, and one of the most exemplar people that we have today. So, we can't really cut them down completely because they produce some really good people, and they did a lot of good work creating places for students to live in Athens. And
would you say that they I don't know, people took the best parts and left the rest of it as in the end?
Yeah, there was a lot of legalism in Zoe. There was a lot of moralism. I remember that they were trying to enforce, for example, the women to have long sleeves so that they won't show their arms, and then they allowed them to have shorter sleeves, and so they changed themselves over time. So all of these things, there was a lot of moralism, there was a lot of legalism, which did not really go well with the understanding of Orthodox ascesis. Okay, the concept of ascesis was transferred and made into laws and rules and regulations.
Yeah.
Instead of teaching people how to live an ascetic life, they taught them how to obey rules. And if they transgressed the rules, they were kicked out, or if they transgressed the rules, they were made, to feel like they were great sinners, things like that, which are more moralistic Roman theology, Roman Catholic theology, or some of the extreme Protestants do some similar things.
Yeah, but would you say that now they're basically gone, and all the people that went through them that are, like Archbishop Anastasios, would you say that they took the good parts of that group and left the other parts behind for the most part?
Yes, I would say so. I never met Archbishop Anastasios, but I know of him, and I think that he's a wonderful spiritual leader, and so is Archbishop Demetrios, who retired recently. So I think that yes, they were formed in that group, and they were educated by that group, but in the end they became really Orthodox bishops that served the church in a great way. And I think there are others that I don't know them because, you know, I haven't lived in Greece for a long time. So,
Sure.
who were made,
Remember.
who were shaped in that positive way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but let's move to a different, away from Greece for a moment, and let's go over to Russia. Possibly the most influential Orthodox nation in the world at the moment, definitely the most influential in the world.
Yeah.
And actually, since the fall of Constantinople, probably the most influential Orthodox nation in the world. So for like 500 years now, with a little blip in the 1917 to 1990. The first time I really heard you talk about it was with them, the 19th century again. What, actually, I have a question. Why? What happened between the fall of Constantinople and, besides the Ottoman occupation, why did the pseudo-morphosis happen? Can you explain that a little further? I mean, why were there no Orthodox schools? Why was Russia so prone to looking to the West for everything?
Well, Russia didn't have a developed civilization. They didn't have a school system as developed as Europe at the time. After the Renaissance, Europe developed its schools and developed its civilization and became advanced in technology and advanced in learning and in science. And I think that what happened in Russia started primarily with Peter the Great, who took a tour of Europe incognito, and he tried to understand what are the things that he wanted to bring into Russia. And one of the things that he did was education and universities. They're modeled after the European universities. I mean, they were actually teaching Latin instead of Greek, for example, until even recently. I don't know what's happening now, but and he built all those churches, modeling them after the European churches and primarily what he saw in Rome. And of course, theologically also, he sent people to Europe to learn and come back. And that's how a lot of things came into Russia. Unfortunately, because
he was in the 1700s.
Yes, it was early.
So
it took them a couple of centuries, and I don't know their history very, very well in detail, so I can get into it and tell you more. But I know that the beginning of that was with Peter the Great, and there was influence also by Catherine the Great, who was a Bavarian and took over and influenced the culture and what was happening. And I think that all of these led to that movement away from what their older style of music, their older style of iconography, and even some theological mistakes that they were absorbing from the Europeans, because again, they didn't know Greek, to study the Greek fathers in depth so that they can actually correct themselves. And so we see that change in Russia, which I think some of the saints made a correction, like 19th century saints, like Saint Seraphim of Sarov, made a correction in the emphasis on the Holy Spirit and the emphasis on becoming dwelling places of the Holy Spirit and be filled with the Holy Spirit. All of that, which was foreign to the Europeans until even recent times, was the corrective move of the Holy Spirit in Russia to bring them back where they needed to. John of Kronstadt, his emphasis on confession, for example, and his emphasis on ascetic life was also another corrective. And then, of course, you have what happened, and then you have great people like Dostoevsky, who wrote amazing books which are literature, but theology is in the background, because they had the spirit of Orthodoxy, and they understood Orthodoxy in a deeper way.
Yeah.
So, in spite of the fact that there were some deviations, I think there were some corrective forces as well that were keeping
Yeah.
them in line with Orthodox theology and Orthodox spirituality.
Yeah. Was Dostoevsky educated in where was he educated?
Monastics, and
I
he
think in
learned
Russia.
from them. He was
in
brilliant
Russia,
enough
but
to be able
he read
to grasp the
fathers,
and he had relationships with to remain within the tradition and to understand what was
Because
happening in the West.
because that's the interesting thing is that this just came to me that orthodoxy is a lot like modal music. You can't write it out on paper for you to get it. There's a lot of nuance that comes from actual practice.
Yeah. Yes.
And you can write the nuances down. Of course, there's something like the actual practice, but a lot of the nuances get lost in broad strokes if all you do is, if all you understand are broad strokes and you don't learn the spirit. It's a lot like modal music, where the rigidness of the West, in the East we have, anyway.
Yeah, I think the music is a good parallel example.
It's a good.
Yeah, because in Western music, European music, for example, there is a great rigidity that you need to stay within the boundaries of those notes. And in the Eastern music, what we call Byzantine music, you have this ability to create these fractions of the notes and kind of give them a touch of your own, according to your own ability and according to your own voice, to give them a touch that is unique. So that you can express emotion in a different way. You can express, and it's not solidly bound by the staffs of the. There are no staffs in Byzantine music, so you're not solidly bound by those. So in the same way, I think iconography. Iconography actually stays within more boundaries. Okay. And theology stays with boundaries. Music is different. It has an expression that is it's different.
It needs to be taught. It needs to be, you need to kind of like live it if you're going to do it. With all of it, you have.
In Orthodox theology, the idea of economia, for example, which is foreign to the West, is one of those things which, again, Western theologians, and I spend a lot of time with Western theologians, and they have a hard time understanding it. And people who come into the Orthodox Church, they have a hard time understanding. What do you mean by that? The rules are rules. This is where you are, But in the mercy and love that the Church expresses for the fallen people, economia comes as a way to embrace them and restore them and help them to recover from whatever fall they are in. And so, we function a different way.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was just reading a comment on one of our videos, your video on original sin or one of those, and the comment was, can somebody from the Greek Orthodox Church please tell me how to be saved? Like they just
They
can't.
They want the formula.
They want a formula.
And original sin, since you mentioned it, is another area where, again, there was a lot of pseudomorphosis of the Orthodox theologians who went to Europe and brought back formulas of original sin that are actually completely Western, Augustinian, and they're not patristic. And even until the 1950s, we had this understanding within the Orthodox Church. And I assume Russia, because I'm not familiar with Russian theology.
It's there too because one time somebody linked us a quote from a Russian saint from the 19th century who was basically just repeating original sin.
Repeating Roman Catholic theology on original sin. See, original sin is a big topic and it's a difficult one because of the use of terms. When you don't define your terms before you start using them, then you're in trouble later when you say things. And when we say original sin in English today, of course, the immediate thinking is Roman Catholic understanding or the Protestant Augustinian understanding that Calvinists, for example, have. But for us, in Greek, it's not called original sin, it's called an ancestral sin. So some modern theologians, Orthodox theologians who are trying to use the right language, they don't say original sin anymore, they say ancestral sin. Propatorikon amάρτημα, the sin of the forefathers. So, and I have done a lot of work on this, so I'm very comfortable talking about it. And I'm quite, I have really discussed this with Roman Catholic theologians and historians extensively, and my publication at St. Vladimir's Theological Quarterly on it, which is part of my dissertation, kind of clarified it for me, and I can talk about this for hours. So original sin is one of those things that was distorted, the concept of the change from propatorikon amάρτημα to this sin that is transmitted from person to person to their children, and that they're condemned to hell unless they're baptized. That is not an Orthodox teaching. And today there are people who come into the Orthodox Church from the West who want to bring back that understanding. And I've been kind of frustrated by that many times, because everywhere where they encounter it, they try to tell us that we are wrong, understanding it in the Orthodox way, and that what they're bringing from the West is really what the truth is. So, as I said, I'm very comfortable talking about it. And it was very interesting, because growing up in Cyprus, he was brought to Cyprus as well. I'm not sure when and where and who brought it and whatever. It was the understanding that was given to the people. So my mother, who was very well theologically aware and studied a lot and read a lot, even though she was not really a very educated person, but she read a lot, she had this understanding. She was taught that a baby, for example, that dies, or a baby that she lost, would go to hell because the baby had original sin. The baby had the sin of Adam. And because the sin of Adam cannot be forgiven unless the baby is baptized, then the baby goes to hell. Well, she lost 5 children in her life, at least 5 children that I remember. And after I was in theology and I read a lot and I started learning what this was about, I returned to Cyprus, and one day she was lamenting like she used to lament when we were children, about the children that she lost. And that, how can God, do this, and how can these children be in hell? And I said to her, no, that's not the case. This is not what Orthodoxy teaches. And she kept telling me that that's the way it was, the way she learned it. Anyway, so that actually made me more curious to find out exactly what the Orthodox theology was about this. And I read and I studied the Fathers, and my dissertation has an entire section on this, which compares Chrysostom with Augustine. And I show in that how Augustine introduced this idea, and I do the historical investigation and how Augustine got this idea, introduced this idea. And of course, Roman Catholicism has suffered from that since that time. And they have been deviating from the original understanding since then, including the proclamation of the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary, which was an effort to cleanse her from original sin. Because how can she give birth to God if she has original sin? So they had to come up with this idea that she was born without original sin, and that's the Immaculate Conception. So, one error leads to another, and
or the way I like
to correct it and correct ourselves first, and correct also these theological misconceptions that exist.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation today. And there's a lot of lack of morphosis, education, and maybe we don't have enough time. Do you know how long we've been going for?
No.
Oh, good. But I think that there's another sort of topic that I kind of want to touch on,
Yeah.
and it has to do with, sins of the father, if you may. That, let's say, somebody, I don't know, murders somebody, and then they have a child. That child could be born deformed, or, I think this goes a little bit beyond pseudomorphosis, but it reminds me so much of it, or rather lack of morphosis at all, perhaps. The complete lack of morphosis, possibly.
Yeah. Well,
And it's something that I've confronted even in the lives of the 19th century saints. I don't want to say who, but I've even like.
so people have been saying things like that, and I met people who say things like that. What that is there are different ways to look at this. Okay. The way I'm looking at it is, if you go back again to the fathers of the church, the early fathers of the church, and if you go back to the understanding of God as a just father and a just God and a just judge, who will not do anything that's unjust. And this is how St. John Chrysostom talks about it with regard to original sin. How can the sin of Adam condemn a person today who did not do what Adam did? Okay, so how can God be such an unfair judge? And St. Chrysostom asked the question, would a human judge condemn a person for something that somebody else did? So would a human judge put in prison the son of someone else, of someone who killed? So would the laws today of men actually arrest a person because they're the son of the daughter of someone who killed? They will not.
Yeah.
Because that's not just. So how can anybody condemn a person for something that their father did, or their mother did, or their grandfather did? Okay?
Yeah.
So if a human judge, St. Chrysostom says, who is not just as just as God and as fair as God, will not do that, how could God, who is the most judge and the most fair of all? So how can you say that a child is somehow punished by God because of the sin of the father? Now, having said that, we have to understand the physical
Of course.
hereditary process, okay? Where we know that a woman, for example who uses drugs, will affect the child that she's bearing in a direct physical way. And so the baby that will be born will have physical issues, problems, health issues, will have low IQ, will have problems with their liver, they'll have whatever, I don't know what the problems might be, but the child will bear the sin of the parent if that sin is more of a physical condition that affects the child. Okay, the same thing happens, for example, in a not a directly physical way, but the directly emotional, psychological way. If the parent has issues, has anger, or is vindictive, or is jealous, or is whatever, that will affect the children because they will be directly affected by the behaviors of that father or that mother. We know that there are physical conditions and environmental conditions and behavioral conditions that cause harm to children by their parents. There is no way that God will actually punish a child for something that the parent did. The punishment or the change or the health issues that the child inherits from the parent are basically the sin of the parent affecting directly the child. Yeah, the physical, emotional, psychological effect.
I mean, if somebody has anger issues, I don't think that I mean, it's genetic, right? That's the transmission. Not because I got angry or someone got angry one time, then now your child has.
Yeah. Well, it could be genetic, it could be psychological, it could be
how could it be
spiritual.
Oh, you mean like what you do to them after they're born? You mean?
Yeah. Yeah, the environment in which they grow up, seeing the father yelling at the mother all the time, punishing the mother, punishing the children unfairly many times, being unfair in his own behavior. I mean, we see this all the time. There are people who suffer terribly because the parents were not good parents. Okay, they didn't behave properly, and they affect the children psychologically and spiritually. And so that is sin committed that affects them. But it's not God punishing the children, it's the parents that create that condition for the child.
Right. Okay. I think we might pick up on this next time. If we think there's more to talk about, there's always more to talk about. I think we will. So anyway, let's. I think this is a good first episode. We'll give it a name by the next episode. And thank you, Father Panayiotis, for joining me on this.
Thank you, Strati, and we'll continue. Okay,
we will continue.
And thank you to our listeners who are looking to learn more.
Indeed. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.